My most popular video to date, by far, is Mastering Scrivener 10 Steps to Write Like a Pro. It's understandable. Scrivener is a very popular tool, but it has a bit of a learning curve, he says, with tongue planted firmly in cheek. In that video, I spent a lot of time on how to configure Scrivener and use it to write a novel. I talked a bit about how to organize your project, but I didn't go into great detail. It's important, though. Organizing your project from the start sets you up for success by making you more efficient and removing the mental clutter that goes hand in hand with something as complicated as a novel. So today, I thought I'd do a deeper dive on how you can organize your project in terms of the folders in your binder. I'll also pass along tips on how to use each of those folders, so stick around. Before we dive in, I'm excited to share that I'm developing a book on the craft of writing. It's called The Three Pillars, A Practical Guide to Writing Fantasy, Science Fiction, and Horror. An early draft is already complete, and yes, I use Scrivener to write it. The plan is to run a Kickstarter later this year to finalize the editing and to publish the print, ebook, and audiobooks. If that sounds of any interest to you, I'd love your support, and we'll leave a link in the description for the Kickstarter where you can sign up to be notified when the campaign launches. Also, if you're interested in buying Scrivener, I'll leave an affiliate link where you can get Scrivener at no extra cost to you, but it helps support the channel. Okay, so let's dive in. This is Scrivener, and I'm focusing on the Dragons of Deepwood Fen, which came out a couple of years ago. It's a completed manuscript, and because it's a completed manuscript, I have a lot of stuff in like the history characters, etc., etc. So I'm going to go over the folders in the binder one by one, but I want to cover first some of the built-in ones. The manuscript folder is built in up on the top here, and then there are 4 more that are typically found. You may or may not have them in your project, but they do come with the default Scrivener project that you can create from like a novel template. And so I'm just going to quickly hit those first and get those out of the way. Let me open up manuscript here. Now, we'll see things like title page, the dedication, those can go into something like front matter. I didn't do that on mine because I didn't have a need to generate this for multiple publications. I was just giving it to my editor in the end. And so I had no need for dealing with front matter and back matter separately. And so I just put them in here. So I have the title page, the dedication, and let me just slip to the bottom here. So these are all the different chapters, but let me go to the end. So way at the end, I have, well, after the epilogue, I have acknowledgments. So again, that could be like back matter in a quote unquote typical project where you're taking out a lot of this stuff on your own and you want to have the ability to tailor your compiles for different purposes. And I'll cover what that means in just one second when I get to front matter and back matter. Keep in mind, Scrivener is very configurable, so I can make this larger if I want to, so I can see these different folders here. And note, let me go to the top again. Note that I don't use chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, that sort of thing. Instead, I give the chapter a title of the purpose of it, a descriptor of what's going on in that chapter. And that's the way you should approach this. You should not be putting chapter 1 and chapter 2 for your different chapters. Instead, just make them descriptive in some way. And then within them, I have at least one, but possibly more than one scene. And so here's an example where Rylan is stealing money. And so I just make them both the same name. But in cases where there are 2 scenes, like here, Rylan returns to Gland, that's the first one. And then he goes and he meets Andros. And so again, the title is descriptive. When you compile, this stuff won't show up, at least not if you configure it properly. I have another video on compiling, which you can look at, and you'll see how these generate into things like chapter 1 at the top of each chapter, chapter 2, chapter 3, etc. You do have to make a special case for like prologue, so it doesn't consider that a chapter. But in general, they will all just be numbered sequentially and exported to whatever you want, either a PDF, a Word doc, a EPUB, what have you. So that's the approach I take for all of my novels. I have one folder per chapter, and then I have at least one and possibly more than one scene in each of those chapters. So that is the manuscript. And if you want some more detail on how to create this and get started, that first video that I mentioned, 10 Steps to Write Like a Pro, Mastering Scrivener, will give you that. So I'm not going to focus on that here. So I'm going to close manuscript for the time being and jump back down here to template sheets. So template sheets, as a reminder, or if you don't know already, they're just templates that you can use wherever you want in your project. So if I look at character sketch, I can see character name, role in the story, occupation. This is completely configurable. This is just a text document that I can customize to my needs. Same thing with setting sketch. And when I need these, I can right click. So I can right click on characters, for example, do add a new from template. And we see that it has character sketch and setting sketch. So those simply appear wherever you right click on the folder, do add new from template. Those will just be available. And you can add new ones as needed and change the ones that are there to customize them to suit your needs. Now let's go to the front matter. So this is for purposes of compiling for different reasons. You have your manuscript, but you may be delivering it to beta readers. You may be delivering it to your editor, your agent. You may be delivering the final version, in which case you want different contents for each purpose. So when you compile, you can optionally choose different bits of front matter and back matter to be included. So front matter has ebook, for example. And so you might have the cover because the ebook has a cover, whereas a manuscript in courier format you're sending to your editor doesn't need that. So you might have the cover and a dedication. The paperback novel might have the title page, copyright, dedication. The manuscript format to turn in might have title page, might have other stuff. In similar fashion, the back matter will have things that you may include at the end, like author, about the author, or notes, or end notes, etc., etc. Anything you might want to include optionally during compile, you plop into this front matter and back matter, and then use them during the compile, and you specify which ones to include. And then lastly, trash. So anything that you delete goes into here. And so you'll find things that you've deleted in trash and not fully deleted, not wholly deleted. You can get rid of that stuff for good by right-clicking and saying empty trash, just like folders in a file system. So just keep that in mind. If you delete things, they're not actually gone yet. When you do the empty trash, they are gone for good at that point, unless you have a backup of your Scrivener project, that type of thing. All right, but let's get back to our folders. So the first folder I want to share with you is plotting. Let me say up front too, even though we're about to hit plotting, these are in any order that you want. I happen to put plotting up front, but you can change the order of these as you wish. So up front, you might be working on characters more than plotting. And so you can just click and drag. And notice how deep this is. See, it goes inward. So right now, if I let go, it will go into manuscript. I don't want that. So I'm going to move it to the left until it ticks over and it's the same level with manuscript. And now when I let go, it's just in line. It's not under manuscript. It's not in that folder. What I want you to take away from this is that you can move things around as need be. You might be working on just the characters in the world early on and not so much the plot, in which case you can pull those up to the very top. Later on, when you get deeper into the plot, you may want that at the top instead. And so let me open up plotting. So what I put in here are different plots that I develop at different times during the story. Early on, I may have a plot that is very raw, like really high level, and I tend to find that over time that becomes stale because I can't keep up with it. It becomes really complex. So let me just give you an example. I use 7-point story structure, and so I fill in some of the details about what's happening in usually multiple threads if I'm working on a multi-POV book, which I often am. And so I'm not going to go over 7-point story structure. Whatever structure you use, you can put in notes about what happens over the course of that book in whatever detail you want. So here's an example of that 7-point story structure. And then I expand on it. I mean, 7 points isn't a lot. You have to expand on that quite a bit to get to the chapter and scene level. And so that's what I do. I go into the hook, for example, and then the first plot turn, etc. I tend, because I write multi-POV books, I tend to color code the events that are happening in the plot per character. And so the prologue is Azaria, and then chapter 1 is Rylan does something with Bothamus's fetter, and then it goes on and on. So these are many chapter/scene type notes in my plot. And as I said, it gets pretty complex. I'm kind of running through this quickly. I'll have things like brainstorming the early stages, or maybe I'll have some problem I'm trying to work through. I will come back to this document or create a new document from scratch to address certain parts of the book. Like I'm having trouble with the last quarter of the book. And so I'll just make a note of the date, and then I'll just start from there. And so this might be the last, from the beginning of Act 3 until the end of the book, that type of thing, or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is exactly. The point is to create new documents however you need to, whatever helps you best to flesh out your plot, to stay on track, to get unstuck as you come across problems in the writing. And so this is just one example of Book 1's expanded plot. If I open this up, I have other things like editing ideas for the first pass. And so this is one thing that I want to pass along to you that has helped me greatly. I make my plans for the book early on. I get the plot to some level of maturity, and then I start writing. And I've talked a bit about how I approach plotting in my plotting video. I inchworm. I project out as far as I can, and I can't go more than about 5 or 6 chapters. And when I feel that's true, when I feel like I can't go any further, I'll stop and I'll plot again. So I will plot out 4 or 5 chapters again, write it, plot out again, write that, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll get to the end of the rough draft. And then as I'm working through the draft, I will come up with problems that crop up. And I don't like going back and fixing things if I don't have to. If I can leave them for another draft, I do, because often my ideas of how to fix something that I've recognized as wrong will mature. I'll get a better idea of the story and the characters, and so any solutions I might come up with early on are probably not quite right. And so I like going further and getting as far as I can, maybe the whole manuscript, before addressing problems. Now, that doesn't mean I don't fix any problems before that first draft is done. If they're really small, I tend to go back and fix them. That's not a big deal. If they are problems that I really do need to fix before I can move on, like they affect how the plot goes, who the character is at a base level, that type of thing, maybe a major plot twist I'm planning, I really do have to go back in those cases and fix that stuff before I can go on. So I try not to, but I do go back now and again. My point here is that you could, and I recommend it, create a document where you put problems that crop up so that you have noted them, but you don't have to go and fix them right now. You can keep your forward progress, keep your momentum, and finish that draft. And then when you're done with the first draft, you have some pretty good ideas of what you're going to do in the next draft. I usually call that first draft a 0 draft because it's just too raw for an editor to look at that point, or even a beta reader. There are too many known problems that I need to fix and that I've notated along the way. And part of it is this editing ideas document for the next draft. And you may even do one for the next draft. So I have another one for replotting the ending. So it may not be the whole thing, but you may have some gnarly problem that comes up that you work through almost in first draft fashion, and then make notes about what you're going to change about it. So these 3 documents are examples of me plopping ideas into documents that are going to help me on the next draft, and it just helps me stay on task. So I might have other stuff like the series synopsis. I developed that early on. Whatever helps you expand on the plot and get ready for that initial draft and subsequent drafts, you just put into this plotting folder. You'll notice I have other things like the series book titles, where I have some brainstorming for what the titles will be. I have that early vision of what the full series was going to look like. I have some other things that probably more properly belong in other folders. This was the first folder that I had, so there were some stale documents in here. I have an early character bios where I just jotted down ideas. So if you find this and want to reorganize, that's easy. Just move this down to, say, characters. So that character bios is now in the characters folder. Okay, so speaking of characters, let's go to the second folder. So we'll open this one up. And by the way, if you want to change any of these icons, you can do so by right-clicking and then going down to Change Icon. There are a bunch of built-in ones, but you can also do icon from text. And that allows you to use emojis. So if I click that and I say something like scissors, I have some different options. I could change it to this if I want to. So you can change any of these to make it look visually how you want. Okay, so back to characters. So in here, I plop obviously the characters that I have, and I draw them from that character template. So if I need a new one, I can, again, right-click here, add from template, character sketch. So I can create a new one and then modify it as needed. So here are some examples. I have these quintarchs, and this one is not from a template. This is just me jotting down ideas. And I tend to grab artwork, perhaps photos of people that I think match my vision of the characters. So here's Skylar Solvina, a character that plays a big role later on. There are other quintarchs, 5 quintarchs in this Roman-style empire. So I threw down some images of them. And it just helps me visualize these characters when it comes time to describe them. I might have something like the church. So this is not one specific character. It's talking about the church in general. I have druids, I have watchers, I have wardens, and then there are specific characters. And because I have so many, this is a epic fantasy, multi-POV, but just lots of characters. The cast is into the dozens. And so I put them into different folders. So here's an example of Ancrus, the ruling class. So Lucrin, Solvina, Tyrinia, Skylar, Ransom, and then Ancrus in general, kind of lower class folk, middle class folk. I have those characters, and these are started from those templates. So I just use subfolders with this little theater type of icon to further categorize these characters because I had so many of them. I didn't want one big long list of characters under the character folder. And then I'll just add things like Lorelai and Rylan contrast. They are 2 characters who are they're POV characters, but they're kind of both the main character along with one other character, Rhiannon. And so initially I was kind of struggling with how are these characters different? I wanted them to be similar in some ways and different in others. I wanted to compare and contrast these 2 characters. And so I'll just throw that in and brainstorm that way. And then one other thing that I like having a lot, I have this names and meanings. I grabbed this ages ago from the internet, just different names from different ethnicities. And it has the meanings of the names and the names themselves and different variations. And then from that, I pulled a name bank. So I have just a ton of names that I generated up front. So I went through that entire document and I pulled out the ones that I liked that kind of spoke to me in different ways. And I added them as like blank. I didn't know who they were attached to in the beginning. And so when I came across a character I had to name, I had a bunch of pre-chosen ones anyway. And then I just went through them and picked one that felt right. And this allowed me to kind of avoid similar sounding names and to cut down on the amount of time. I really agonize over the names. And so I didn't want to spend so much time as I have on previous projects. And so I just pulled a bunch into this name bank. So that's kind of useful to have on hand for a larger project. So that is characters. Let's move on to history. The world is more what the world is like physically. And the history, I moved to a separate document. So I have things like the timeline since this great event 1,000 years ago, for example. And then under there, I might have something like a more recent timeline because the older timeline is really quite long. It's centuries in the past. And I wanted something more detailed for what happened recently. I talk in plotting about the inciting incident and where you start your story, but also the initial conditions. Like, what is the world like just before the story opens? And I spend a lot of time on that. And this is part of it. This is figuring out what happened in the past, how all that led to the present, and then a more detailed understanding of what happened. So I go back like 40 years ago, 37 years ago. Some of these I'm just calling out so I can kind of focus on them. They're important bits. 30 years ago, all the way to the present. And then I wanted to note their ages as well. So my point is not the specific contents of these documents. My point is you can organize yourself so you know what happened and how that led to the situation that's about to unfold. How is the protagonist in a place where they're going to get swept up into the inciting incident, which is usually driven by the antagonist? How did the antagonist end up in that situation? What did they want so badly that they started to put these things into motion? You know, the plot before it gets to the protagonist, that sort of thing. And then there was another example where Quintarch Lucrin has a son who he sent off to war in Syria. And that timing became so important because he died as a result of the war. He didn't die in the war. he was wounded and, in fact, got his mother into the drugs that he was using for pain. And so I just wanted to notate all the stuff that happened. When did he go to that campaign? When was he wounded? When did he come home? Who gave him the drugs in the first place to start using? So you can use history to just detail anything you need to that gives you more clarification, more understanding of how everything got to the place where the story begins. The world then is, as I said, more geographic stuff, like what is the world like itself. I do have things that are kind of related to characters, like swearing, like, what are the common phrases that people use when they swear, different world ideas, like just what it's like to live there, what are the features of it, the nature of the Holt. I have this notion of these two heavenly bodies, and dawn and dusk are called cant and reckoning. And so how did that come about, and what does that mean specifically? And those two suns give rise to two types of magic. The bright sun gives rise to a light sort of magic, and the dark sun gives rise to a dark sort of magic that's more physical in nature, less spiritual, like light magic is. And so I just wanted to detail that stuff. Again, note, some of this is a tiny bit stale. It's related as well to like magic, which I pulled into a separate folder. But I'll have things like the world and the Great Basin where all the stuff, the events of these books take place. What are the different places, the regions within it? What are the cities, the villages? What are those like? What is the military like, and the names and ranks of those different groups? I took this from a real place in Switzerland, and it allowed me to visualize where a lot of things take place in Ancris, one of the capital cities of the empire. And on, just different things, money, the empire, and what it's like. This is some really early stuff that I was drawing from to help seed some ideas about what this world and this story and these characters are going to be like. And then we have research. So this is really more for things that you might want to research or take note of and use in your book. So here's an example of a chalice that I took from a real ancient bronze chalice from Wikipedia. I just wanted to be able to see it because I was using it as a direct model for a chalice I used in the book. The Vulgar Tongue Dictionary is a resource that has types of slang and swearing used in Britain. I'm not sure what time exactly, I forget. Modern ideas to research. I might look at ways that people build private fortresses. I watched this Planet Earth 2, this documentary, and I was going to use it for this book. I never actually did. So this is another example of a stale document. I could have deleted that, but I never did. I just kept it around because I didn't go clean things up constantly. I might have things like the jacket copy, which I help to develop sometimes for my books. Here's book 1, for example. I wanted to get a tagline that the publisher might put on the front of the cover or perhaps the back to entice readers to look at it. And then I had the copy. And so here's an example of me taking a stab at the copy. Then I sent to my publisher, and we went back and forth on getting that ready for publication for the actual book jacket. So anything that you want to put in here, you can. And also note that you can create a new document. It's easy enough to just click here, hit enter, and you have a new document, and you can put whatever you like in here. You can also, however, add links. So if I right click here, I can do add, and I can do new text, new folder, new from template, but then there's existing files. So if you have a document that you just want to import into Scrivener, you can do that. And then you can do web page, and you give it an address that can be an external URL. I think you can actually do internal documents here too. And then you just give it a title, and that creates a new document, a new link inside of here. And Scrivener does have a browser capability, and so you can bring that up in Scrivener as well, assuming you're online. So that's research. Let's move on to magic. And so this may be magic if you're writing fantasy. It could be technology, something along those lines. If you're writing science fiction, it could be horror elements if you're writing a horror story. And so you just put how your world works with respect to the speculative elements within this folder. So here I have the two suns I mentioned, and because they drive the magic, they provide the magical energy for the world. I put that under here, and I detailed how Lux and Nox, the bright sun and the dark sun, work. I might have things like arc fire, where the stores of energy, these opposing forces of energy, can sometimes burn one another up in arc fire. The people who use magic, I might put that under here. So dragons can use magic, and they take some magical power from dragons as well. They might harvest aura or umbra, etc., etc. Again, the point is not the specifics of my world. It's just to give you an idea of what you might put into the magic, science fiction, or horror folder. Then you might have a separate one for flora and fauna. I have a lot of dragons, and not just dragons, but dragon types. I have 5 main umbral dragons, which gain energy from the dark sun. They harvest it from the dark sun. And I have another 5 types of dragons that are radiant dragons, and so they get their power from the bright sun. And these 2 types of dragons hate one another. They always fight when they're in close proximity to one another, unless they are bonded to humans, in which case the humans can affect them and kind of allow for them to be in the same area without going crazy and attacking one another. But I put in all the different names and then specific dragons, but also the types of dragons and what they're known for, like a gold dragon, a bronze dragon, and endurium dragon, something made up specifically for my world. And then I might have another note about, I use alchemy a lot in the book, and poisons, that type of thing. So I wanted to note where different things came from and their magical properties, different drugs and illegal substances that come from those things. Just anything that is of note, I'll put into flora and fauna. And note that I could put this in worlds. That makes some sense, but what I found is that the folders started to get just very complex and cumbersome. And so I started to have trouble finding the things that I wanted to find. And so making new folders where they make sense can be a net positive, even though it makes this top level a bit more complicated. It can help you in the end to kind of keep everything in the right place and easily accessible because you know where it is. I think in the end, it's generally a net positive. So just, you can use these obviously and add new ones that make sense for your particular project. Then we come down to edits and feedback. And so let me hit edits first. So this has the specific plans I have for a given draft. And I had some stuff under plotting, and that's because I created those there first, and I was just going heavily back and forth to that document. So more properly, I probably could have put some of those under edits instead. But this will have things like the plans that I have for some new draft. And then after some edit is complete, I might make a new one. So something post-copy edits. And I tend to make these kind of a hit list type thing, meaning when I finish one, I color code it. So these green ones are done. I just knocked them off one by one and marked them as green. And then there were some cases where I had some ideas and they didn't pan out. I didn't like them when I actually went to go change them in the manuscript. And so I tossed them, but I didn't want to get rid of that entirely. So I marked them as red instead. So they're complete. They're just not, they weren't addressed in the manuscript. And I just wanted to keep track of those ideas. I didn't want them to go away entirely. And so this is just a place where you can add your thoughts about how you're going to address different problems in a given draft. Feedback then is the feedback that you get from different people, the beta readers, editors, agents, whoever. And so I just create a different document in each of these, and I might have different pros and cons coming from different people, and I keep this as is. In other words, whatever they give me, I just put into a document in a feedback folder so that I can reference it. I don't want to edit that document because I want to take my own notes separately. And so what I'll do is I'll collect maybe 2 or 3 beta reader feedback. I had a couple editors at one point from different publishing houses, and so I'll get my editing feedback from the 2 editors at those 2 houses, and then again, plop them into the feedback folder. And then from that, I get away from the project while they're doing that. I try to get away for, say, 8 weeks, maybe even 3 months. It kind of depends on how quickly I finish this, where the book is in terms of the publication schedule. But 2 to 3 months is a good goal. I would say minimum of 6 weeks. And then when I get the feedback, I then kind of collate it. I go through and I make my plan for my edits from the feedback. And so again, I might have 3, 4, 5 different sets of feedback, and I'll just kind of compare and contrast. I'll take the things that speak to me in terms of what they're telling me. Some may conflict. Some people may have conflicting advice on how to address a problem. in which case I just have to sort through that, sometimes with my editor, sometimes with my agent, sometimes with the beta reader directly, just brainstorming how that might be addressed in a different way, perhaps. And then I'll make my plan. And so when I am ready to do the edits, so I'll have the feedback, I'll pull it into these documents. I have kind of two main sources now of my plan for the next draft. One is the edits themselves. The second one is the manuscript itself. So now let me jump back to the manuscript. So if I go back here, I'm going to open up this folder. So right now I'm focused on the manuscript, so it shows the entire thing. This is the whole 212,000 words, big book. This is a completed book, and so I didn't have any comments. So these I just made so you could see some. As I go through a draft, I will take notes for larger things in that edits document that I showed you earlier. I will address any really small changes immediately. Because if they're really small, I don't like to let them linger. So I will correct those small things immediately. And then for things that, I don't know, just aren't very big, but I'm not yet ready to tackle them, it might be because it's dependent on something later, or I haven't fully thought through the process and I'm not ready to do that. Like I really want to get farther or maybe all the way through the manuscript before I determine the fix for some problem. But it's not like super big. And so in that case, I will just make a note inline. So I have these comments that are part of the manuscript, and then I have the edits document as well. So those are the two sources that I use for my next draft. And I do that over and over again. After my 0 draft is done, I do that to make the first draft. Then I do a couple of polished drafts, send it to beta readers. They give me feedback. And usually it's pretty raw at this point, right? It's still a pretty early draft. And so they may have a lot of comments. And so I'll go through and incorporate their comments. I'll make notes in the manuscript and add to an edits document. And when I'm ready to work on the next draft, I take both of those sources to help me get a bigger, better next draft. And then I just do that again for my editor feedback for the structural draft. By the time I get to copy edits, it's usually starting to become less and less necessary to have so many notes. You may still use either inline comments or the edits document. All I'm saying is the amount of content will usually get less and less because you're getting closer to that final draft. The story is more mature. It's closer to your vision. All right, so let me close up the manuscript. So feedback helps me to generate documents in my edits, which helps me to tackle that next draft. So that's kind of the purpose of these two, edits and feedback. And then lastly, deleted scenes. Many people will tell you not to delete your words, and I believe in that as well. I mean, why cut it? You might have a use for it. You may have cut something that you think, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or I need to take some of the ideas from it anyway, and you just want it as reference. You might also use this as a source for like a Patreon or something, deleted scenes. So instead of right-clicking something and sending it to trash, I will just click and drag that down to the deleted scenes folder and put it in here. And note that I also have things about cut bits. And the reason I do that is because it's not like a whole scene that I cut, it's just part of a scene. Well, this is 3 paragraphs in this case. Here's one where it's maybe a page and a half or something. So again, it's not a full scene, but then I do have some where it is full scenes. So here's an example where Azaria had some older chapters. I took an approach in the beginning that I just didn't like in the end, so I got rid of that. And so here's the old prologue in its entirety. So that's just an example where you can move either small bits into this deleted scenes or entire chapters or scenes as well. So that's it, the 10 folders that I wanted to cover that hopefully will help you to create organization up front, allow you to reduce clutter in any one area, and to be able to find things that you need for your reference at any point in the process of creating your novel, from brainstorming initially to writing it to editing it in the end. Organizing your Scrivener project helps to keep your mind on what really matters, the story itself. That, in turn, helps you to make your story bigger, better, more gripping, and emotional. I hope the 10 folders we discussed prove useful to you. If so, I hope you'll like and share this video with other writers and writer groups. Coming next on the channel are some writing cheat codes and where book openings go wrong, so be sure to hit subscribe to be notified when those come out. Until next time, dream big, stay positive, and keep writing. Peace, everyone.